Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm your host, Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is a guest of the podcast who I have not had on before, Russell Little. Welcome to the show.
I'm so excited to be here, and I'm glad to meet you.
Oh, I'm glad you're here too. So far, it's been really great talking to you behind the scenes, and you actually kind of suggested a topic for the show, at least to start us off, which is cursing in fiction, or I assume fiction, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Cursing in fiction. What do you? It said you got you said you had a strong opinion on it. So let me know what is it?
Okay.
Let's go from there.
So you develop these characters while you write. You know this because this is the way you do it. And as you're writing, these characters become, if you're any good, and even if you're not, if you're working hard at it, they become multidimensional and they're alive in you. And I'm a planner, not a pantser. I plan everything out. I don't write by the seat of my pants. But, so I'll do a whole outline before I start writing. And, but as your characters develop, they start taking lives of their own. And sometimes they won't do what you tell them to do. And they say things that you don't want them to say. And as these characters develop, sometimes not all of your characters are nice people. Sometimes, in fact, they're very not nice. And I write psycho murder thrillers.
Okay.
So I have a lot of unpleasant people. And here's another thing, Tim, is I get bored with single-dimensional characters that don't have the other side to them. Mm-hmm. My characters have good points and they have very bad points.
Right.
I'm not really interested in my characters unless they're not. In fact, in the book I'm writing right now, I had this big breakthrough. I have a character taking over the book because they're so screwed up. And it's just like
Isn't that the best,
me.
though? That's awesome. I love that when that sort of thing happens to me. And I'm a pantser. I'm a full fly by the seat of my pants writer. So, I do not outline much at all. I do like maybe chapter titles, and then I just change those if they become inappropriate later. Just for your context, yeah.
Right. And you also have to differentiate, so different characters have different voices, right? Mm-hmm. And some of your characters curse.
Yeah.
And some of them curse a lot.
Yep.
And that's a part of your writing. And if you are afraid of it, you start filtering your characters. You don't get the real person in there. And in my first book, Murder for Me, I actually have one character in there, total street guy. And he's somebody that is hired to kill people. But this isn't a professional killer. This is a guy from the streets.
Ah, okay.
And in his dialogue, he says a lot of curse words. I know this guy. I practiced law for 40 years. I know how this guy talks. And I got to tell you, I got 125 reviews for the first book. Mm-hmm. But the only review I remember is the one that said that she couldn't finish the book because she couldn't stand his dialogue. I hate it.
Yeah.
I'm still mad about it.
No, that frustrates me sometimes too. Like actually, a while ago, this is a few years ago, and I won't say the narrator's name, but I was in talks for. I was trying to get an ACX contract, for an audiobook for one of my longest, my longest novel, Origin of Storms, which is like this big space opera kind of sci-fi fantasy thing. And there's like a little cursing in it by my standards, just a little. It's a little more realistic, like in tone than most of my, like not realistic, more modern. So the curses are pretty much what you'd expect from our world, right? It's got a more modern tone than most of my fiction, which is like, they're going to say by the gods or whatever, instead of, or whatever, some equivalent curse would be in a lot of my books. But in this book, they throw around bitch and damn and stuff like that. And this narrator wouldn't do it, which was weird. I was like, wow, that's strange. I mean, this is like not the the characters, it's not like they overdo it. It doesn't sound like their characters are, it also doesn't sound like the characters are as nasty as this guy you're describing as far as their language. And yet, for this narrator was like, no, can't do any cursing at all, basically. It was really disappointing. I mean, I don't understand that I don't understand that as a I mean, obviously it's their preference. It doesn't matter, but I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but it is interesting that I've never been that sensitive about cursing, right? In fiction of any kind, yeah.
And we're writing fiction for the 21st we're in the 21st century.
The new millennium, yeah.
And the culture, whether you like it or not, is there. I've been listening, we've had this election. I've been listening to all the different newscasts talk about what happened, what's next, from left to right. And I can tell you there's a lot of cursing.
Yep.
And I'm watching it on TV.
Yeah, hell yeah. I mean, you don't even want to know what they're saying on YouTube. If you, I
listen to it.
Okay, yeah.
I know what they're saying.
Exactly, you know that, and there's so many of these commentators are just they are pretty blue in that sense, not in the political sense necessarily, but they curse. Yeah, and it is. I actually think I really like that kind of thing, especially if the other characters react to it realistically, right? Like if you get, or not. I don't like the word realistic. I just say it by habit. No, but if they react naturally to it, right? So, if your character is cursing a lot and that's just how they talk, and somebody else and another character doesn't like it, that's kind of a fun interaction too. You can have the characters kind of just, no, I just stop with the language, right? You can't say shit here.
Or here's another time when your character that's a cursor is in, like, you put this character in a law office or before a judge or in front of an older woman that he's trying to impress because he's highly attracted to her, but he thinks that she's a rich, expensive woman and he wants something from her. And it's different. Then there might be a slip by him, but he won't, it's a part of your character development and a part of the development of the scene.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's got to be one of the most important things is just the characters changing how they talk to each other, changing how they talk to different people. I've definitely heard the theory as well that I forget, I've heard about it. I haven't heard that. I haven't looked into it directly, but I have a friend who's a professor of rhetoric and communications, and he once told me that every relationship is it's like you're if you have a three-way conversation, that's really like, was it 7 relationships? Because it's one for each combination of people, and then one for the whole group, which is kind of an interest. But you know what I mean? Like if you think about it in those terms, like everybody's going to act differently based on the combination of people and who they're actually addressing in that moment, and it just is wildly complex. But because we're people, we can handle it for the most part. I mean, it's actually pretty doable in a intuitive fashion, at least for me. And I mean, I say that as somebody who's been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, right? So I had a hard time learning all this stuff, but I've kind of figured it out at this point. I mean, it took me long enough. Got gray in the beard now, that kind of thing. But it is super fascinating to me, all those relationships and how they fall together, especially because I don't plan any of that stuff really off the bat. I have like a premise and a genre that I start with, and I kind of just go from there. Maybe I have the first scene or idea. What do you do when you start a book? I mean, you plan a lot, but where do you like to start a book, I guess, rather than just, yeah.
Well, the way I start a book is I chart it out, right? The whole chapters. But after a few, 2-3 chapters, I've already started to lose my way because the characters start becoming alive. Like I just said in the book that I'm writing right now, I've had this great epiphany while I'm writing this one character. I've fallen in love with him because he's so repugnant. He's like the character in. Do you ever read Confederacy of the Dunces?
Oh, I have not. I really should.
Pulitzer-winning book. You should read it. It's the writer was in New Orleans. He's writing about New Orleans, and his main character is so repugnant, so terrible that you can't forget him. Now, the book had a weak ending, but the first half, 2/3 of the book is about this character, and you can't put the book down because he's so repugnant. And I love that. And when I started this book, I wanted to develop a character that you just couldn't stop reading about because they're so messed. And I think I finally hit it, and now I'm going to have to completely re-outline the book from here because this side character that's starting to take control is going to take control of my book.
And is that all right with you? Or are you going to have to replan everything to get rid of them? I mean, because I've heard people approach things both ways.
Well, here's what I intend to do. I'm going to write the book that's in front of me, this inspiring character, and then I'll deal with it on the rewrite.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah.
So I'm going to write this. I'm going to finish this book the way I'm going to write for me about this character and write the book, and then I'll figure out what to do with it in the rewrite.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you only get one chance to write the first draft, but you can write as many other drafts as you want. You know what I mean? And honestly, sometimes you get this more than one chance to write the first draft. I've done that before. Just throw out the whole first draft and start over. But yeah, I actually really love editing as well and rewriting, but especially just editing because I find my book gets so much better from the rough draft. I mean, it's funny because if you edit with a little bit of confidence, you know how some people. I know there's lots of people. I have a lot of writer friends, and a lot of them will say, I hate editing. There's a few in particular I'm thinking about here, but I know lots of writers will say they hate editing, but that's because it's a skill that you have to develop kind of separately from writing, and you can't develop it until you've written a bunch of stuff. So you're always worse at it to begin with than you are at writing. And I think that's why people just have this kind of distaste for it.
Okay, now I've got to admit something here.
Yeah.
This is a personal secret. I've known you a little while, so I can tell you. I'm being a little bit of a hypocrite about that because I actually look differently at rewriting and editing because I love to rewrite. You get to a line and you just expand on it, or you shrink it, or sometimes you cross it out, or you didn't even realize that you wrote it the first time.
Yeah.
But editing with an editor is like a nightmare for me. Mm-hmm. I have to admit, because when I have an editor, I work hard for them. I do what they want. I do what they suggest. But I got to tell you, I never forgive them.
No, I mean, I don't mean editing with an editor. I mean completely self-edits. That's mostly what I enjoy. Or, I mean, I have worked with editors, and when I do, I tend to just take what they're saying, and if it's not something simple, I basically redo it my own way. You know, I don't just do what they say. If they're like, this sentence needs X, Y, and Z, I'll try to figure out how to do that in a way that's still mine. You know what I mean? Rather than just slapping that stuff into an existing sentence, you know? This
brings me to a story about the book that I'm out promoting right now. Murder by Storm. So I wrote Murder for Me, and my main antagonist in this book is a woman named Marilyn Rodriguez. But I did not, in the first book, explain any of her background, why she was the way she was, or how she did what she did. And I got to tell you, I had readers just bury me with questions about this. But I have to admit this. I was intellectually afraid to write from the perspective of a woman. I didn't think I could do it. So my intellectual challenge for Murder by Storm, one of them, was to write from her perspective about who she was and why she was the way she was. And I had to reach out to a very good editor, a woman who would constantly help me reword and rephrase and explain to me how I was totally wrong about a woman's perspective on this character. And in fact, it got to a point where when I was in chapter 7 and 8, she had read it and she came back to me and threw the pages at me. We were in a cigar bar having a cigar, and she came in and sat down and threw the pages at me, and the bar was like, "Whoa, what's going on? What's going on?"
You've been served, sir. Yeah.
And so, even though I've said what I said, I got to tell you, this editor helped the heck out of me and helped me really get to truth.
Yeah.
And write from a woman's perspective. And I got to tell you, for me, it was a challenge.
Oh, it was tough for me as well. I've written a bunch of novels, right? But my first novel that I wrote from a woman's perspective was really difficult, and it didn't turn out. It's actually the worst book I ever created, never will be published. But, I mean, my longest novel, that one I mentioned earlier, Origin of Storms, is all from one point of view. And it's all the woman in that book. And that one took me over a year to write. And I think after that, I kind of had it I had like at least the basics of how you write female characters, how to write female characters that in the ways they're different, And I didn't, at least in my particular way, right? Because I only write characters that fit my kind of worldview, right? I don't think there's any other way to do it. I don't mean like they all agree with me about everything. I mean like I can't create characters that I couldn't imagine exist, right? In some way or another. Or I couldn't imagine how they work. That's probably a better way of putting it, because I do write fantasy. Like a lot of my characters probably couldn't exist, right? They're dragons and things, whatever. But yeah. Anyway, I like what you said there, though. I think that makes so much sense. Is like because it took tons of feedback before even that second book, Origin of Storms, got decent, and because I was a 25-year-old guy trying to write a 30-year-old woman. I was like, how am I supposed to do that? And I'm kind of shocked that book is getting the ratings it's getting now. People are liking it, which is kind of wild. Even today, like it's kind of had a second life that's popping off a little bit. And actually more like the third life, because the first life was a release of the book in 3 parts, whatever. That was just a mistake I made. Because have you ever tried that? Have you ever tried? I mean, I don't know. How do you get published? First of all, I mean, how do you publish through a publisher, or do you?
Okay, well, my first book I published myself.
Okay.
Because it was the first murder for me was basically the challenge. There was to write a book, to do it right, to have it edited, and to get it out so everyone else could see how stupid I was, right? I didn't feel like I had actually written the book unless I exposed myself, right? I was very happy with the success. Then I got a publisher for the second book. They reissued Murder for Me because they wanted to do matching covers, right?
Right.
So Murder for Me came out a second time in May, and then a cover that is coordinated with it for Murder by Storm came out in October, and so now I have a publisher for both books, and I have a publisher for the third book.
Nice.
That'll be out next year if I get to work, and this character that I've now fallen in love with doesn't mess up the timing, right?
Yeah.
Which it probably will, because you've already heard me describe what I'm going to do.
Yep.
So now I have a publisher. It's an independent publisher in Texas.
Okay. Cool.
I'm in Georgia now, but it's an independent publisher in Texas that actually does the podcast that I've done for 9 years called Author Talk.
Okay.
Right? So we both do this. And they're publishing my book, and I can't tell you how wonderful it is, but it's really hard to find a publisher for your first book. And